Hello, and welcome to this NJCU Center for the Arts digital event. We would like to ask everyone to please keep your cameras and microphones off during the program. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the program, and we will only be accepting questions and comments via the chat window. At the bottom of your screen if you are on a computer, or possibly the top right if you are on a different device, you should be able to see an option for chat. If you click that, it will open the chat window where you can type your questions so that they may be read aloud and answered. Thank you, and enjoy the event. Please note, the views and opinions expressed in this virtual event and presentation are solely those of the individual artists in their personal capacity and are not reflective of nor represent official policy, position, or views of New Jersey City University.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Creative Process series. My name is Stephanie Chaikin. I'm the director of the Center for the Arts at New Jersey City University. And tonight we're delighted to bring you a conversation with Emily Bernard, moderated by Dr. Edvige Giunta and Meili Ellis-Tingle. So I'm going to start off, tell you a little bit about our speakers this evening, starting with Dr. Giunta is the author of Writing with an Accent, Contemporary Italian-American Women Authors, and co-editor of 5 anthologies, including The Milk of Almonds and Embroidered Stories. At New Jersey City University, she is professor of English, where she has trained scores of students in the art of memoir and created the first course devoted to the Triangle Fire. Dr. Giunta's literary nonfiction and poetry appear in many journals and anthologies. She has been profiled in the New York Times and the Italian television RAI for her work in memoir and Italian American studies. Her book, Talking to the Girls, Intimate and Political Essays on the Triangle Fire, co-edited with Mary Ann Trascietti, will be published in 2022 by New Village Press. Meili Ellis-Tingle is a senior at NJCU, majoring in English with a concentration in creative writing. She is a member of the English Department Student Events Committee, and she is the recipient of awards for outstanding coursework in poetry and academic excellence in Introduction to the Study of Literature. Emily Bernard is the author of Black is the Body, Stories from My Mother's Time and Mine, which was named one of the best books of 2019 by Kirkus Reviews and NPR. Black is the Body won the 2020 Los Angeles Times Christopher Isherwood Prize for autobiographical prose. Emily's previous works include Remember Me to Harlem, The Letters of Langston Hughes and Carl Van Vechten, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, and Some of My Best Friends, Writings on Interracial Friendship, which was chosen by the New York Public Library as a book for the teenage. And with Deborah Willis, Michelle Obama, the First Lady in Photographs, which received a 2010 NAACP Image Award. Emily's work has appeared in Oh, the Oprah Magazine, Harper's, The New Republic, NewYorker.com, Best American Essays, Best African American Essays, and Best of Creative Nonfiction. She has received fellowships from the Alphonse A. Fletcher Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the MacDowell Colony, the Vermont Arts Council, and the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard. Emily was the James Weldon Johnson Senior Research Fellow in African American Studies at Yale University. And she is currently the Julian Lindsay Green and Gold Professor of English at the University of Vermont and a 2020 Andrew Carnegie Fellow. So we're in for quite the amazing treat this evening. Thank you all for being here. And Eddie, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and welcome everyone. And thank you so much, Emily, for being here today. I know it's meaningful for all of us who have gathered here, both at NJCU and also from elsewhere. I recognize many names. And for me, it's especially meaningful to spend the next hour with Emily Bernard, whose writing I absolutely adore. And I'm very honored to have her as a counter among my friends. But I want to say a few things about what it means to get to know the work of a writer that you know as a person. And it's almost, there is a whole new level of discovery, because you think you know someone very well. And then through the book, there is an experience of revelation and the whole series of encounters that are ever so surprising and amazing. And I am just in awe of her work. And I've taught this book 3 years in a row. And every time I teach it, I learn something new. So I'm especially thrilled that my memoir students who have read this book this semester are here. And I cannot think of better work, better time spent than with Emily Bernard, as they are working on their final projects and trying to tell their own story. I also want to say something, because Emily, you are a little bit of a myth, because in 2009 you started the 100 Word Group, and it was a little group that you created with inviting the 6 fortunate friend writers. And then I happened to share the idea with a group of students, and they just took the idea and ran with it. And they're literally generations of NJCU students and graduates who have created 100 Word Groups. And so on their behalf, I say thank you, because the 100 Word Groups have created the community. And that work has been very much on my mind this semester when I'm teaching for the first time flash fiction and flash nonfiction. So we have many reasons to be grateful. Welcome. Wonderful to have you here. And I just would like to ask you if you can get us started hearing some of your beautiful writing.
Thank you so much, Eddie. It is such a pleasure. It's a bittersweet experience looking at you on the other side of the screen, because it was with my darling Edvige that I spent my last night on Earth, as it was in the before times, when, you know, our worries were so different and we walked the streets with ease. And I'll forever cherish that night, which was already a night to be cherished, of a typical night at Eddie's home, which is an extraordinary night for everybody else in the world. It included music being made on the spot and singing and sharing food and stories. And it was a wonderful evening. And Eddie, you know, you've played such an amazing role for me in my life as a fellow, as a writer of making stories out of our lived lives, as a teacher, as a soul sister, someone I know I can absolutely rely on. I mean, Eddie's one of these people on Earth for me that I'm glad the world goes on, but I'm glad I spent that last night with you. I always, whenever I enter any room you're in, I leave, I feel just enriched and sated. Just, we have a connection that is just, makes me feel that I belong on this earth, to get really deep, to be really frank. So, you know, your formidable skills as a writer, Eddie, and as a teacher, your attention to words and sentences and the shapes they can make, it's breathtaking. And you share that every semester with students, and you share in your own work, which I've had the distinct pleasure of watching being made firsthand at that desk behind you. I think I was sitting at that desk trying to make something happen on the page while you were clacking away, writing on the other end. So, but I could go on, and I shouldn't. But I will say that on this day, when we just received the verdict, guilty in all 3 counts, guilty, guilty, guilty. It is really a pleasure to be here. You know, sometimes, you know, as a writer, we do these things and there's a kind of disconnect, you know, from your real life, but it's great to be here because I know that you're feeling what I'm feeling right now. happy about this moment and watching to see what happens with sentencing too. But I know that I'm in this world with you, Eddie, and I really value that, knowing that all the time. So thank you for being my friend and for just modeling excellence in everything you do. So, and I'm so pleased actually to also meet Meili tonight. Eddie, you've spoken so highly of her. So Meili, I'm so glad to be sharing the stage with you. And yes, 100-word groups. It pleases me so much to hear that. You know, just to feel that you've some way contributed to so much community, and that's a wonderful feeling. So I'm very pleased to know that that continues. I always love hearing that. So what I'd like to do is read a bit from my essay. And excuse me, I'm having a little bit of beeping on this end of things. So let me just close some things down. Okay. I want to read from my essay, Motherland. That is an essay in Black is the Body. And at this moment in the essay, it's about adoption, about traveling to Ethiopia, meeting my children, meeting their family, and the trek going to Ethiopia and the trek back is loosely the anchor, you know, of this essay. And at this scene, the scenes I'm going to read begin with my husband John and I having arrived in Edvige, the city where my daughters were born. And I think the rest speaks for itself, but so that's where we are. It is 6:30 a.m. in Edvige. Our driver, Giunta, takes us slowly along the rough packed earth. The mountains in front of us have seen everything. Their outlines are so precise, they seem like cutouts in the sky. We drive slowly as the road thins and then disappears, as if it has surrendered to the commanding natural landscape around us. Helen, our American adoption agent, had told us the road would end, and we would have to walk for an hour to meet the girls and their family. Another agent, Marjorie, dismissed this information as another one of Helen's fantastic stories. Giunta pulls the car to a gentle stop among small bunches of beaver tail cactus, with stems as wide and flat as paddles and decorated with bristles like stubble on a man's face. There are only 3 yards between us, but the men's voices sound tinny and far away. Underneath my feet, the earth is as light and packed as brown sugar. Within arm's reach is a small island of green bordered by a layer of rocks. In its center stands a tree with a thin trunk and a flowering crown, like a tall, skinny kid with an afro. In the distance, more trees, some dense and willowy, stand in a line on faded, cracked earth. The sky is thick with all the blue left in the world. I nearly trip on titanic pieces of shale. My boots catch in the valley of crevices between them. The sun quickly discovers the skin beneath my hair, hat, and the rest of my clothing. I feel its piercing impact in my joints and lungs. If we had been in the States, if we were anywhere else, I would have been preoccupied with how soon I could seek out a piece of shade under which to hide. But here, even as I stoop, stumble, and trudge my way forward, I begin to understand that beneath this piercing sun and breathtaking sky is exactly where I belong. Everything lies in front of me. Nothing is behind. There is no shelter, nowhere to hide. The sun, it may be relentless, but it is glorious too, evaporating any doubt about the road ahead. I stand up straight. The heat is not something to shun, I decide, but only something else to carry. As we approach a group of thatched huts topped with perfect cylinders of long grass, my heart beats so rapidly that I reflexively cover it with my hand. I smooth my shirt and adjust my hat. I hope I look like what the family wants for their twins. As we are greeted by the people to whom the girls belong, I imagine a woman being presented to a groom at the inauguration of an arranged marriage. Be prepared to be treated like royalty, Helen had written in an unusually helpful email. Indeed, the girl's family has slaughtered a sheep in our honor. A large platter of the roasted sheep meat sits on a clay table. The loaf of bread we bought in Adigrat is placed on the side. Everyone gathers to eat, but after a few token bites, I sit back on a bench molded from the same clay as the table and walls of the wide circular room. I try to arrange my features into an expression that communicates my appreciation for the food, my desire to enjoy it, and my inability to do so. I am not successful, it is clear from the quality of murmurs. Emily doesn't like it, Berhanu says, and smiles sympathetically. I can tell he is trying to translate the disappointment I have caused. It is terrible to know that I'm failing to demonstrate the boundless depth of the gratitude I feel for everyone in this room. A torrent of emotions clog my throat. My palms sweat and tingle. I'm rigid with anticipation, eager for the wonderful, terrible moment in which the girl will be placed in our arms. Beside me, John eats heartily and drinks sheep's milk from a tin cup. I cannot say no when the milk is offered to me. I feel multiple pairs of interested eyes on me as I bring the cup to my mouth. The twins' grandmother brings out the baby we will know as Isabella. She is wrapped in the same light blue quilted outfit that she wears in a picture Helen sent months ago. Her grandmother, a slight woman with a lightly wrinkled face, stands in a space that separates two rooms of the family home. The sky shines a movie star light down on the two of them. Isabella regards me dispassionately as she takes in the entire scene. Julia emerges mid-wail. She is afraid because she has never seen white skin, Berhanu says, and gently touches John's arm. Julia continues to cry as we stand outside the compound and are presented with carrots so bright and large they could serve as props in a Bugs Bunny cartoon. John gathers us together for a photograph before we begin the trek back to the Land Rover. The return hike feels more arduous, the sun hotter, the air drier. I'm trying not to show my exhaustion. The grandmother has a swaddled Isabella strapped to her back. Her steps are light and efficient on veins of rock that protrude from the earth. I walk next to one of the baby's cousins, a girl of 11 or 12. Her eyes are large and kind. The braids in her hair shine. She wears Julia, who seems to be dozing, on her back, underneath a cloth secured to her faded green dress. We take turns looking at each other and then looking the other way before the other one catches us. There's so much I want to ask and tell her, but the membrane of language, fine and opaque at once, travels with us like a mobile glass partition. Even though it feels a bit silly, the next time I sense her looking, I meet her gaze, and for the second time today, put my hand over my heart. I press down hard. When she looks away, she is smiling. You are part of our family now, an older male cousin tells us, but that's it for goodbyes. John and I are hustled into the car, whose rumbling engine inspires more caterwauling from Julia. The babies are shuffled around. I hold Julia, who screams and stares at me with tears cascading from her eyes. Isabella rests quietly in John's lap, snug in the nest of his arms and chest. Suddenly, she sits up and opens her mouth slightly. Sheep's milk spills out of her tiny body. Julia follows suit. Before her second round, I take my hat and turn it upside down under her chin. 3 hours later, we have become almost used to the smell and the feeling of our daughter's vomit caked on our clothing. We are sticky with heat and sweat and bodily fluids by the time we arrive at the airport in Meili. John leaves the girls with me while he rushes to the bathroom to clean out my hat and rinse Isabella's excretions from his shirt. With the baby tucked into the crook of each arm, I sink into a plastic chair. My dizziness and blurry vision must be a result of the heat, I think. An older woman wearing a black hijab sits down next to me. She holds her arms open. I hand her Julia, and she pulls a small blanket from her belongings and hands it to me. She and John each take one of my arms when it's time to board. I still feel rickety as we walk toward the plane, but I have a firm grip on Isabella, who emerges from the cloth on my shoulder as slowly as a plant sprouting from the earth of a time-lapse video. She stretches her neck like a periscope and pivots her head slowly, a stern look on her face, like a general assessing a battlefield, or Magellan surveying the Atlantic, I think. And when she smiles, I believe we are sharing our first private joke. John has decided that it is my particular job to tend to, Julia has decided that it is my particular job to tend to her. So John and I trade babies once we are seated. She and I fall asleep quickly after takeoff. A few minutes later, a wave of pain propels me out of my seat and toward the bathroom. Along the way, I shove a miserable, indignant Julia into the arms of a pretty flight attendant. The thing about unpasteurized milk is that it does not agree with everyone. I'm on my hands and knees in the throes of thudding, seizing abdominal pain when the attendant knocks on the door. As soon as I undo the latch, she snatches the door open. I look up. She is stony. I am perpendicular. Madam, your baby, she sniffs and presents me with Julia, who looks down at me with what appears to be alarm on her 12-month-old face. I'll stop there.
Wow, I just want you to keep reading. And I have read these so many times. I've also listened to it many times on the wonderful Audible version, which I highly recommend. So thank you. I'm just really, you brought us there.
You were there almost, Eddie, right? You were the one of the few people. You were there on the other end of.
Oh yes, I remember opening those files with the pictures and those girls walking inside the house and just taking over and owning the place. So it really brings back a lot on a personal level, and it's such an extraordinary story, and just the kind of gentle and also ruthless reconstruction. Like, you never look away from anything, and that's one of the things that I so love in you as a writer, and it's really exemplary for anyone who wants to write honestly and truthfully in writing. So I want to just tell our audience, I'm going to ask Emily a few questions, and I promise I will exercise some restraint, because I could ask all of them, but I won't. And then in the second half of the event, you will have an opportunity to ask questions, but you can start posting your comments or questions on chat, and then Meili will help us out. So, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about children and how the role of children in your writing. And I'm kind of in awe what you do with children, because children are the giants of your writing. And, you know, I know the subtitle of the book is Stories from My Grandmother's Time and My Mother's Time and My Time, but the children are really astounding. And, you know, in both, of course, Julie and Isabella, who are amazing in real life and on the page, but their playmates, Megan, the little girl, like the incredible scene with the hands, and you know, there is something that you do with in your depiction of children, and they become so important in the way in which you, I don't want to say you explore race or tackle race, because it really feels so mechanical and falsifying. I think, you know, the way in which you tell stories that have to do with that, how we live race in our daily lives, in our relationship, is what makes your writing so incredibly moving, and you cannot really look away. So my question to you, what do you do as a writer to make these children like so present?
That's a great question. I love that. And I do want to emphasize, just I have to say a couple things. One, I don't know if people are aware of this, but there is a war going on right now in the Tigray region where the girls were born, and some really serious human rights violations happening. And so it's always, I read those pages. I mean, they're taking on more meaning for me now, having been in that landscape. And I read tonight to honor, my daughter's family and all of the people in that region. So I'd like to just say that tonight. But yes, Eddie, you played such a role in my being able to, to tell the story at all in so many ways. But children, yeah, I think, in some ways I feel that I became a writer as I became a mother, and in some ways I was making those serious decisions at the same time. I always knew since I was a kid that I wanted to, to be a parent. But making the decision to adopt from Ethiopia, these are big decisions that you make. And how do you make them? And how are you going to manage everything, as a parent who wants to be committed to that, to raising children, but also to writing. And in some ways, I really developed a writing voice very much alongside developing a maternal sensibility. You learn both things on the job, really, right? You learn how to be a writer from writing, and how to be a parent from actually, raising kids. And in both arenas, you're just making mistakes and learning from them, trying to make better mistakes the next time. So I think that's one reason why kids are so alive for me, because I feel myself, I think as a writer, I'm always learning, I'm always watching, the way kids are, that you should. And I think being a writer reminds me of the child I was, that was always watching things and always trying to sneak in, lingering a little too long in the kitchen to grab a little more of that adult conversation, and so I am very empathetic, when it comes to kids, because whenever, any of the girls' friends are I'm like, good for you. You're becoming a writer. You're spying. You should. And I feel them watching me and John talking. I think, yeah, I know what's happening. I was there myself, overhearing some interesting adult conversation. So I think that I'm very much aware, the way kids are like writers. Often people forget about kids. You're in the background, but you're absorbing everything and learning. So I think that I've always imagined myself as aligned, with the kids in the room who are kind of puzzled by what's happening, but are watching and learning and developing. I think I see myself as a writer more like the children. And also, for me, this book was so much about trying to understand, Toni Morrison said she wrote books because she needed to read them. And I'm sure that's true of you and me as well, Eddie, but it's also true that, I thought about the little girl I was, and the kid who really needed a book like this and needed stories like this, that somehow made space for my own confusion, ambivalence, lack of understanding about living in the world. I wrote this book in some ways to keep that kid company. And I think to keep company with all of that part of all of us as adults, to me, this book is really a very intimate book, and written from these intimate spaces, lack of certainty, lack of clarity. And that's what, I'm sorry about that. My husband just came in because he's listening, I'm sure, to NPR and the verdict. He didn't hear what I was saying when I texted him saying, Eddie and I are on the screen. So I think that's probably why a lot of it, I think I return to that place, when I'm writing, the place of wonder and approaching the world in that way, with the lack of, I think the older I get, the more exhausted I am with the kind of the adult pretensions around certainty, you know, and having all the answers. I mean, the older I get, the more I think that this is not true. No one has all the answers. And so I think I write to get back to that sincere place of wondering, to return to that place, and to kind of, in some ways, honor and recognize that in the reader. You know, that's what I think I'm writing to. I never thought about that before, but I think that's probably why.
Well, I think your book should be among many other shelves as a parent guide on how to be with children, on how to think about race, whether whatever your race might be. You really show us the way. And I think, as you know, as a reader, we are. I mean, the sense of wonder. This, you know, you really said it. I am just amazed by these children, and I feel also sometimes as a reader almost a sense of guilt over not having paid attention when I may have found myself in those situations. So in the sense, your writing is very instructive in showing a way to pay attention. So staying on this theme of the sense of wonder, you know, and as a writer of personal essay and memoir, we know that so much is discovered in the moment of the writing, so much that we didn't know before the writing. And so I'm gonna try to, let me see if I can explain this. I was wondering about these moments of discovery that occur for you as a writer. Does the reader recognize those moments? And so I'm gonna bring you one example, you know, so maybe it's completely off, but there is that moment when you talk about who has caused you the real harm, that the real harm has not come so much, the worst harm has not come from being stabbed by the doctor and the icy glare and the words that he speaks. And that for me as a reader felt, it had the shock of a surprise and the discovery. What was that moment for you as a writer? Was that something, an understanding that came through the writing, or did it pre-exist the writing?
That was probably the hardest thing I had to write in the whole book. That's very true. You know, the thing about writing that essay was full of surprises for me. You know, I mean, by the time I wrote the essay, Scar Tissue, I mean, it'd been a good 20, you know, at least a good 25 years or so. I mean, I think I probably started in 2016. So it's that 22 years. And at least over 20 years since it had happened. And, you know, I told the story many times, but I knew that in telling it, of course, you know, it's nice and smooth, you know, when I told it. And I was curious about what would happen if I, you know, pulled back the curtain on my own self, you know, my own little pat story that I tell. I thought, what's really underneath there? You know, underneath the surface of this, you know, we've all got this, like some kind of maybe utility closet that's stuffed full of stuff. What happens if I open the door? You know, what's going to come out? And so I wanted to, that was hard. But it was the true kernel of the story, you know. And in fact, when I reached that point, what surprised me was how alive it still was. My rage at the doctor. I mean, I actually had to stop and write a letter to, I don't know if it was actually, I spent the whole day trying to track down the name of the physician, of the attending surgeon that night. And so I got close enough, you know, I made calls all over, starting of course at Yale New Haven, and then tried to find who this person was. And I wrote that doctor a letter and told him about the damage he did to me. I have no idea if that was the correct person. I have no idea if the letter reached him, but it felt good. And I had to go back to the page in a different place, if you know what I mean. You know, that place of raw emotion, it couldn't be sustained, right, for the whole essay. You know, I had to kind of get out. I don't know. I mean, there's probably some equivalent in the culinary world. You know, I had to kind of burn off whatever layer first of just pure energy to get back to making this into an essay, and where it played in the essay. And I had to get past that place of raw emotion. But yeah, I mean, I was surprised at how much anger I felt when I reached that point in the book and thought, boy, I really haven't processed that, at all, what was said. I've said it many times, but I haven't really processed it. So I had to do that. And I think that what you're saying is correct. I think that hopefully the reader's experience, as you say, of a kind of, okay, this is a moment that was true, writing it. But I think for us as writers, everything needs to be used, and we have to be in charge of that. I always think, my job is to deliver a psychological and emotional experience for the reader. The sentences, the words are the vehicle. I'm trying to take you on a journey and give you an experience. And so I have to get out of the way, even in a story like that, that is literally written on my body and that is with me all the time. And I feel it all the time. Even in that was a challenge. I had to get out of the way in order to make sure that I didn't lose sight of the journey that I was taking on the reader on, which was, I thought, a journey about truth telling, and how hard it is to tell stories, to tell true and full stories, all the obstacles that are against us, in what was seemingly a very benign act, which is just to retell something. I wanted to get at that challenge itself. So it was, for me, a moment of shock. And there were other, definitely moments of real surprise for me as I was writing, that I felt I wanted to keep as fresh as possible, for the reader's experience. And that is certainly one of them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And, and definitely that getting out of the way is one of the greatest challenges that as writers we face, regardless of what level. And I know that I encourage my students at this time, especially, to get out of the way, because sometimes we get in the way when we're getting very close to something that is important and perhaps feels dangerous. So you said essay. Okay, I'm teaching your book in a memoir class, and essay or memoir and essay. I was thinking of a book by a writer you and I love, Luis de Salvo. Her last book, The House of Early Sorrows, is a collection of the early pieces that she wrote that later evolved into books or became books. Let's not use that term, evolved. That was the original intention, but then the book, as it sometimes happens with book, took a life of its own. And so the book is its own internal integrity and coherence, and yet they are very different pieces. So it becomes this memoir in essays. So you tell one story as many stories and many stories and one story. So I think of back as the body as memoir and essay. Would love to hear how you look at it or how you looked at it before writing, but I'm also especially curious to learn about the process of sequencing these different pieces and what choices did you make, and is there anything that you left out?
Yes. Well, I started writing these essays, just as individual essays. I mean, I really didn't have a book in mind when I started. The first essay I ever published was Teaching the N-Word, which I wrote in 2004 or 5, I forget. And, I've always admired the essay form. I've always felt very much at home in the essay form before I think I even knew what I was really doing. But I've always liked the economy that the form really demands. To me, it really just, it speaks to me. I was on a panel recently with Amy Hempel, and we know that Amy Hempel wrote a short story in one sentence, I mean, there's something, to me, it could just be when I came of age as a writer and the writers that were speaking to me then, but the idea of having that kind of command over the sentence always really just dazzled me, what you can do with a sentence, So when I started writing, I was writing in that place of love for the essay form. And over the years, I wrote that book, and that book came out before you know, most other things I've written, other books I've written. So it was something I was doing along the way, purely to capture and assimilate my life experience, you know, really was the home form for me. And so it wasn't until I think maybe 2015 when I wrote Black as a Body, I think that's right, that I started thinking, okay, I'm writing a book of essays. So a lot happened, you know, a lot happened in between, you know, family happened, a job happened, other writing happened, other books happened, but I kept writing essays. And so when I wrote Black as a Body, I thought, okay, I have now, I think, a question that pulls this book together. And that had to do with generational memory and about stories that are handed down. Particularly, I was thinking about my maternal line, just because those are the people who taught me to tell stories and to appreciate stories. So I was interested in that question, but I'll be honest, I mean, you know, it took me a long time to get to a place where I felt I sort of had an elevator pitch for this book. You know, I still sort of hard pressed, you know, in a sentence. And then I think I read Joanne Beard's book, The Boys of My Youth, and she talked about having written those pieces, you know, in a writing in workshops, and she was just writing essays, you know, and then there was a thread that she kind of helped her. But honestly, you know, my editor told me, and I was so relieved because I heard for years, you know, well, essay collections don't sell, you know, unless you're blah, blah, rattle off the name of some famous essayist. So I was sort of laboring under that resignation, you know, like, well, I guess I'll never make it as an essayist because they don't exist or whatever. And then I remember my editor saying to me, "You are an essayist." And I was, oh, thank you. I feel really recognized, you know. But we decided to use the word stories in the subtitle. And why? Because you know, my editor felt that, you know, I'm an academic and I have that background, and neither of us wanted people to feel they wouldn't enjoy the book. There was going to be some kind of cold medicine, you know, by this professor, you know, and I really didn't want that either. I mean, I wanted to expand a reading audience, not to shrink it, you know. So we thought, well, since I've got that academic thing, let's try to balance it out so people don't feel that, you know, this is some kind of you know, a different kind of book. So, but then I warmed up to it. I thought, you know, I really think of myself as someone, I still see myself, you know, on the porch of my grandmother's home in Mississippi, you know, just again, eavesdropping on the grown-ups as they talked and holding those stories. So I think of myself as someone who is a keeper of stories, you know, other people's, my own. You know, that's what I was put on this earth to do, I think. And so it made sense to think about stories, you know, to think about a very old-fashioned, you know, well, a term, how human beings always pass the time, you know, sharing stories. And that's what, you know, we do in the South. So I thought it made sense to me, but I didn't think of it as a memoir. You know, it's obviously there are whole patches of time that are left out, you know. And I did go back when I sort of thought, okay, I'm building this book. And so what needs to be told? And I'd written the essay Mother on Earth, you know, about which I wanted to write a different kind of adoption story from the adoptive parents' perspective. And then I thought, well, Motherland, I need to kind of now say what happened. You know, really, honestly, that was a story I wrote, an essay I wrote thinking, okay, now that fills in the gaps, the kind of who, what, where, when of Mother on Earth. And I'll tell you, I was a little, that the essay presented some challenges because I thought, well, I don't want to, like scar tissue, I don't want to kind of tell an overly sentimental story because it's too easy. You know, I mean, all stories of international travel are kind of exciting, and then stories about adoption are always full of twists and turns. So I thought, I want to kind of capitalize on that. You know, I wanted to do something different. And so I had to really watch about managing the emotions in that essay, but also being true to, you know, what I experienced. But yeah, so a lot is left out. I mean, there are pieces that didn't make it into the book. And some I felt just weren't good enough. When I went back and looked at, you know, other things I published, I thought, well, that doesn't really, some I thought they didn't really conform to the tone of the book. And yeah, so I mean, I did definitely make some decisions about leaving things out. I mean, there are things I pulled at the last minute. I had one essay, you know, RIP. My editor said, called me and said, "I'm going to save you from yourself, to Emily." And I think she was right. I mean, of course, I was annoyed for a little while. She's usually right. And I looked back and I thought, yeah, you know, I mean, I think this essay, it's still, I mean, I've been working a long time, but I think she was right and it wasn't really ready. So we pulled that, made other choices, but I wanted to have a, you know, a consistent tone. I wanted to, if I was going to leave things out, be consistent about what I was leaving out. And you know, but once I think I found I had Black as a Body, I thought I had a kind of a good, I knew what the journey was, you know, and I sort of had a sense of where I was going. And then I think once you have that, you know, you have a sense of what's the last line or what's the last beat, you know, then you're just writing to that. And it's a little bit easier of an experience if you know where you're going. You know, I can see a little bit of the signpost up there. So I'm just walking forward. Now I'm going to reach it. So once I had that sense, then I knew, but it took me a long time. I mean, I rewrote the introduction. I mean, I don't even know how many times, maybe 10 times. You know, the epilogue came a little more easily because I had found my mother, it literally was a gift. My mother, you know, I found her essay. I thought, okay, this is it, you know. And then I could actually go back and sort of reassess the movement of the book and kind of refine it a little bit. So it was just a process, you know, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, and then finally, you know, then it was ready to hand in.
Well, we're certainly glad that you handed it in. And yes, you are a story keeper, but you're also a story giver. And we're certainly very grateful for these stories. And I could keep going, but I'm not going to. I'm going to be generous and I'm going to give an opportunity to our audience to ask you some questions. You and I can continue this conversation. So Meili, do we have any questions from our audience? So I know you also had a couple of questions yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Emily, for your answers to those questions, especially hearing about like your process of putting the book together, how you edited that intro, that was just, thank you very much. Our first question is from Chris, and she's asking about the organization of chapter 4 of Black is the Body, which is Mother on Earth, which you were just talking about. She asks, the organization method is different compared to many other chapters. It is broken into different parts with a focus on a different aspect of the same subject. Was this method easier or more difficult? What were some challenges that this organization method presented? What were some benefits?
Great question. Thank you for that. And I'm glad, I just want to say to you, Meili, and to, you know, everyone, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to, I know how that, I can feel that when you said that. I know, I'm glad to share about, and I'll just say that the introduction, I mean, I really did rewrite it so many times. And I had my good friend, Major Jackson, who would just, sometimes to emphasize, he would just call me and say, no, I mean, as opposed to writing a text or an email, he would call me, are you sitting down? No, this is not working. And, you know, it really helped, you know, I mean, after I, you know, cussed him out, then I privately, you know, my head, then I had to go back and say he was right. And I had to rework it. So it was tough, you know, and I think that we run into those things and often we can't predict, right? Sometimes you write something and it's just like butter, you know, it's just, yes. And then sometimes you're sweating and sweating and sweating over something and you just cannot predict it. But what a great question about the organization. I think, you know, and I'll be honest with the asker and say that if I had written this book as a book of essays, I'm not sure what that essay would look like, to be honest with you. So I can only answer it truthfully, you know, and begin by saying that, you know, it was already written out there in the world. And I knew it was going to be in the book because I liked it, you know, so, but I am interested always in form. You know, I think that's something fun that writing an essay can allow you to play around with, you know, as opposed to maybe a bigger piece that you get to play with form, to think very carefully about form. And so I mean, in my, just this, I think my larger quest, this question about, like, you know, telling a story, how people tell the stories, I'm always interested in that, you know. And so I'll just tell you, I have a friend who said this amazing thing that blew my mind one day. she was telling me about her first marriage, which was I'd never met her husband. I never knew her back then, but it was apparently really bad. And she was talking about, just all the terrible, she's a writer too. So it makes sense. It matters. And she said to me, tell me a couple things. She said, to tell you something, if that marriage had worked out, I would be telling the story very differently. And I thought that is the most honest and fantastic thing that anyone's ever said. It's like, yes, these things happen and they were terrible. But if this marriage had worked, I would be telling you a different story. It doesn't mean I would be lying to you, but I would be shaping it differently. So I don't know. She said that to me about 10 years ago, and I've never, it was such a gift. And so fast forward or return to this essay. So I'm interested in storytelling and how form can affect the way we digest a story, the way we hear it, receive it, and shape our telling. How even just where you break in a paragraph, do you have is there a space? Is there a room for a beat? Do you number things? How do you do it? So I wanted this essay to be as almost stark and surgical as I could do, because that essay it comes directly from an experience I had with a woman I know who had adopted a child and then given birth. And her child she adopted, as she was getting a little bit older, became interested in learning about her biological mother. And this woman I know was very upset about that. I mean, privately to me, I don't know if you know. But I tell you, it made me feel like I couldn't firsthand understand why she was upset about it. Okay, but partly because I have such an intimate relationship with my daughter's family, and there's something about her, like big emotions and sadness about that made me feel really kind of crowded in my own as an adoptive parent. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to write a story about being an adoptive mother that's just really practical. 1, 2, 3, in some ways is what I was thinking. And to me, the truest line in that book, which has made some people who love me say, Emily, when I said people die every day and the living have to pick up. And that was the truest thing that I had to say in that essay. And so I wanted to tell that story because I wanted to get away from, kind of that. I mean, I know that the essay is romantic, I feel very romantic about my kids, and how we became a family. But I wanted to just say these things, without judgment, without a lot of sentimentality. So I want to tell another kind of story that wasn't like a wringing my hands story, but saying yes. And I like to say what Eddie says, like the ruthless thing of saying, when I talk about the wonderful, terrible moment, because my daughter, and I say in Mother on Earth, my daughters, we became a family through a set of terrible circumstances. If their biological mother had access to a hospital or any medical anything, they would be with her. But the reality is that it didn't work out that way. And now I do my job, in this story. And so I wanted to say that. So that's so the kind of the way I structured the essay was trying to echo that or open that door up for me to tell in some ways, a more pragmatic story than a story full of hand wringing. So that's why, I was, very interested in what happened if I took away that seamlessness and just said, okay, yeah, and the story, this is what happened. It was messy. There wasn't, and once beginning and end, in the same way that Motherland is a beginning and end, right? We start with no babies, we end up with 2 babies. But in Mother on Earth, I wanted it to be a little messier, a little more like life feels in some ways, not so smooth. you know, so that's what the structure was meant to try to do something different or communicate a different kind of emotion, I guess, around. And I thought that those two work together, Mother on Earth and Motherland, because Motherland is one of the only essays in the book that is, you know, just sort of like beginning to end. And I thought that would be interesting, a pairing, because they are structured very differently, but they're still about the same kind of story. So I thought I wanted to play with it. I wanted to see what would happen, you know, almost like an actor. I'm gonna try this fake mustache now and a bowler hat and see what happens if I try that. You know, I mean, it's not fake, you know what I'm getting at. So it was just, but maybe a different kind of costume or a different kind of, you know, not costume, but whatever the apparatus is a little slightly different, you know. So I wanted to see if the story would change.
Thank you. So we end at 7, right, Eddie?
Maybe we could go a few minutes extra. Let's have another question, and then Emily
Okay.
will just read us a very short piece.
Okay. So we'll just do. So the next question was from Phyllis Capello. She says, Emily, how did you persist in your questioning the folks in the kitchen?
Let's see. Well, I think, you know, again, if you're light on your feet, and you know, and I was a little four-eyed thing, so I just would sort of sit. You know, Emily's so bookish, so I had that cover. You know, my mother, oh, Emily, she's just always sitting there reading something. Little did you know, I was reading like this. You know, but you know, so I got away with a lot just by being, you know, hiding behind my glasses and my book. And I think that, you know, but I think you know, that's a great question, and I love it. And it also lends to a question, a bigger question, you know, how do you manage, you know, your family I mean, I think a lot of memoirists, right? A lot of personal essayists, we have that question, you know, how can I, you know, someone asked me point blank the other day, like, how do you tell stories about people that you still want to have in your life? You know, how do you maintain relationships and write about those people? And I only have, you know, stories, you know, I had the great privilege and pleasure of meeting Vivian Gornick last summer. Actually, I met her years before, but I met her again. She and some friends were visiting from New York. They had a house in Vermont. I drove to see her, and I talked to her about this, and she said, you know, when I was Vivian, you guys might know Vivian Gornick. She's 85 now. I'm sure she wouldn't mind my saying. Famously 85, and she we just won a huge award, by the way. The congratulations to Vivian. She won the oh, I don't know who knows this award. I can't remember the name of it. Somebody knows, I'm sure. Big award. Okay, the Wyndham Campbell, I think, a Wyndham Campbell Prize. But anyway, so she said I was a very dangerous person, you know, when I was a young writer. I was very dangerous. She said, you know, everything was mine to write about. And she said, you know, she learned over time, you know, to create and honor boundaries. And I think that for me, it also is a process, you know, about, you know, you learn. I think as writers, we have to be true to the stories we need to tell. We know what we need to do. I think about that documentary, you know, Man on a Wire. We're all him, you know. I mean, if you watch a documentary as a writer, you're going to say, yes, that's me. I just have to attach a wire between these two buildings and walk it. Don't ask me why, but it's something I have to do. And so, you know, we know what we have to do, but not everything we have to write has to be published, right? Not everything we have to work out on the page has to be published, and not in the form, you know, that we write it in at first. So you write first freely, tell the censors, sit over there, turn to the wall, be quiet, and write. And then as we get closer, you know, to publication, to figuring out the book we want to tell, then we decide what needs to stay and what can go. You know, there are writers with different philosophies around this issue, you know, and there are some writers who say you have to be true to the story and that's it. And others who say, I never write about this and that person in my life. You know, I talked to a writer recently. She said, I never write about my husband. I never write, you know, she's written books with her child, but never written about the husband. So she has her own boundaries, you know, about what is okay for her. But I say to and I'm sure Louise, I'm sure Eddie, you know, we'll have this talk. I'm sure Louise has said many things, and I can't off the top of my head. But I think that, you know, we have to be clear about what our motives are and be honest with ourselves what our motives are. And you have to be alive to the problem, you know, because I think it does present ethical issues, right? When we write about, people ask me about writing about my kids, you know, I've written about this. Actually, I wrote a piece called, But What Will Your Daughters Think? Well, you know, addressing this very issue. So these are real issues. I'm not a writer who says, oh, it doesn't matter, just write what you want to write. No, I think that it does matter. And I think that it matters to me as somebody who is very much, you know, in a community, in a family, in a community that I value, you know, it matters. So, but I think we figure it out in time. And I think what Louise said that to me, you have to be alive to the problem. And then really that's as far as you can get. I think, you know, you decide book by book, piece by piece, poem by poem, essay by essay, you know, because sometimes, you know, you obviously can't please everybody. And I think for too many women, we are in the business of pleasing people, whether or not we intend to or not. You know, it's very easy for us, right? It's reflex. You know, is everybody comfortable with me being alive and doing what I need to do? And at some point we have to stop, because there's going to be some man somewhere or some woman who's going to say, no, be quiet and be polite. And that's it. So, you know, and I do think that there are stories that will chase you to the grave, you know, and you're going to either write them or not. And it's up to you. And we have to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and say, am I proud of what I did? You know, did I get to a deeper truth? For me, my testing place is always utility. I think, am I doing something that can help in some way? Can someone use the story? Can someone, you know, I never would have written the piece even about the surgeon that moment, right? I needed to write it. It was my way of being in charge of that moment, you know, to write it. And I knew that it would be important, you know, to someone. I knew it would validate someone else, you know, who had this experience that maybe on the surface you would think the person I would rail against would be the guy, the assailant. But actually, you know, this dude, I mean, he's hopefully on his meds now and not hurting anybody else. I mean, you know, Godspeed, literally. But that surgeon, you know, I don't have generous feelings about him. I don't have anything opposing generous feelings. You know, people say, oh, wow, you know, so great. You don't blame. It's like, no, I have a lot of rage in my heart. It's just over here. So, you know, I think, you know, I think that we have to decide, you know, is this story, it's not about even the people in the room, right? It's not about Great Aunt Nancy or this person or my neighbor. It's about those readers out there who can really use this, you know, and who really might be liberated by this. I think we always have to keep our mind, because think about the books that saved you. You don't know Terry Tempest Williams, but When Women Were Birds saved your life. So you know what, you owe Terry Tempest Williams, you know, because you took something from that book and now you need to put it back in the universe. You need to put it back. You can't just consume all the time, you know, and that's how I feel. You know, you eat at somebody's table, they prepare a beautiful meal. If you're lucky enough to eat at Edvige Giunta's table, then you need to bring her a pound cake when you see her next time. You're not the greatest baker, that's fine, but she made a meal for you and you have to pay back in kind, because otherwise she'll starve. Somebody else will starve. So you know what I'm saying? So I really do feel it's that basic, you know, we owe what we took. And that I think, is our final judge. You know, just, are you replenishing what you took? And I think as writers, we have that duty, you know, to the ether, to the atmosphere, to Mother Nature, we owe it, you know. And so oddly, you know, that's how I give back. And it's how I love, you know, it's how I love. You know, I write about my kids, I love them. I find them really interesting. You know, I write about the people I write about because they're really interesting, and they've educated me in some way, and they've opened doors for me. And you know, they've played a role in my being able to tell stories in the first place. So that's how I kind of am oriented as a writer.
Thank you so much. I think I'm glad that we are recording this. I think this is just the manifesto of the writer as someone who has embraced an honorable profession. Just really beautifully put, and I think it works both, in the sense of generously embracing what the world and thinking about what the world needs, but also if you do that, you're actually also honoring the story that you need to tell. And yes, there are moments that of rage, but Black is About is so much a book about the nature of love and how we can love each other and how love can be found or need to be dug out even of the most difficult and uncomfortable moments. It's a true gift, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of all the readers who are here, have read your book, and then many more that I know will be enriched by this reading. Emily, I was wondering if you could just bring us to the end of the event with a quick reading, which would be the perfect way to end.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Eddie. All right, thank you everybody tonight. I'll say goodnight before. Thank you so much, all of you. Stephanie, thank you for making this possible. And again, Meili, and my darling Eddie. I'll just begin. I'll begin the end by reading from my turn, or my epilogue, my turn. This title belongs to my mother, of course. A few years after my mother died, I discovered a cache of papers she left in my childhood bedroom closet. She buried them in an act of elegant and amusing symbolism underneath a pile of my father's long forgotten wrinkled shirts. The papers consisted mainly of poems, drafts and drafts of them, but there were a few essays. I hadn't known she wrote essays. One of them is an autobiographical narrative about her life as a child in the Jim Crow South. It's called My Turn. When my mother was a child, she often accompanied her beloved grandmother, Mama Timpy, to a local grocery store. In order to get to the store, they had to walk past rental houses owned by a lumber company. One day, some white boys threw rocks at the two of them. A pleasant stroll turned into a nightmare, my mother wrote. Mama Timpy, who practiced the kind of Black stoicism that has served as a guiding principle for African Americans since the inception of African presence in this country, walked on without evincing any emotion, while the white boys jeered and pelted them with stones. When my mother asked Mama Timpy why they were being treated that way, her grandmother told her that the boys didn't know any better and should be pitied instead of hated. My mother idolized Mama Timpy. She accepted her grandmother's reasoning, and as an adult went on to practice the same kind of forbearance that made Mama Timpy the embodiment of strength and moral fortitude in the poetry my mother wrote. But the rock still wounded. She wrestled with the wounds in My Turn. Her grandmother's keen analysis of the nature of racism, that it was a consequence of ignorance, did not stem the flow of blood that ran down her leg. After reading the story, I knelt on the floor, my heart racing. I reached the final lines and then started all over again. I was looking frantically for something. What was it? I didn't know, but I kept scanning the lines over and over, my throat tight and my breath short. There was something I needed that I didn't see. What is it? I kept asking myself as I read the paragraphs again and again, and then searched through her other papers, looking and looking for what? Some words to correct the abomination of the rocks on my mother's bloody leg. And then I realized that what I was looking for was a salve, an answer, the end. For while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it must always be heard. There isn't any other tale to tell. It's the only light we've got in all this darkness, James Baldwin explains. It took me a while. It took the journey of this entire book, but I realized that there was a lesson, which was in every scar there is a story. The salve is a telling itself.
Just perfect. So beautiful. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for your generosity, for your beauty, for your power, for your strength, and for the inspiration that you are giving us tonight and many, 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 many more times. I want to thank our audience. I also want to thank Meili. I love this working with my students from the English Department, Student Events and Publications Committee. They are the ones who ask to bring writers who will challenge them and inspire them. And the NJCU Center for the Arts for our wonderful collaborative relationship that makes possible to have an evening like tonight. Thank you so much to our audience, and we will see you next week with Joanna Clapp-Serman on Tuesday. Stephanie?
Thank you so much, Eddie and Emily and Meili. You are amazing, and our hearts are so open from hearing you. Thank you so very much. I also want to thank Anna Carhart, our theater manager, Justin Tinker, our technical director, and Sabrina Sabalo, our box office manager and Zoom maven extraordinaire. We have some amazing things coming up that we'd like you to join us for this Saturday night. Baron Ryan in concert. He's an amazing pianist, and you don't want to miss this. And next up, we have a conversation with Joanna Claps-Herman on April 27th. Again, do not miss it. The Honey Dewdrops played an amazing concert this past Saturday, and they're going to do a songwriting workshop for us on Thursday, April 29th at 11:10 a.m. And we have a BFA, the third of our BFA artist talks and presentations on Friday, April 30th at 2:00 p.m. So you can visit our website, njcu.edu/arts, and sign up and keep writing and joining us and speaking your truth. And it's quite an auspicious evening. So our hearts are open, and stay in your body, stay in the work. Thank you so much.